it's linguistics, whether it is mechanical engineering, areas where some might say there really aren't going to be a whole lot of differences in the physics and things of that nature. But be that as it may, I believe Kuyper's comments, as they have been elucidated by the professor, serve as a strong admonition or a strong warning to Christian scholars, those who would take maybe the mantle of Christian scholarship, to warn them and to realize that we cannot exclude or close down our attentiveness to the perspectives, the ideas of others in our area of inquiry. So I appreciate very much the elucidation of Abraham Kuyper's. I'm not a Kuyper scholar at all. I really don't know why I was asked to be a part. Professor Enlow said, do some research and see if Bonhoeffer has anything to say about Abraham Kuyper. And I tried a little bit, but you notice the reason I went last this evening is because I did not do my homework. You know, there's no written comments available for you. I did not do my homework, and so I was put on the end of the agenda. But I do believe that the comments, the presentation that was made is a very strong contribution for us to listen to Abraham Kuyper and to realize that he not only gives us a reason as believers to continue to engage in every study, every area of study that you are called to, wherever that is, and whatever discipline you are engaged, to continue vigorously in that from a Christian point of view, from a Christian set of foundational beliefs, but also, more importantly, take heed and realize that every one of your colleagues engaged in your discipline does have something to say that you should be attentive to, that you should listen to, seek to understand, and then engage and evaluate. But don't shut down the conversation simply by saying you don't come from the same set of foundational beliefs that I do.
Thank you very much, Professor Shulton. 감사합니다. 우리 슐튼 교수님의 그 코멘트를 간단하게 한글로 요약을 한다면요. 오늘 우리 심포지움을 후원해 주신 여러 기관들이 있습니다. 먼저 우리 한동대학교 20주년 기념 위원회, 우리 서병선 위원장님을 비롯한 여러 교수님들께 진심으로 감사를 드리고요. 그 다음에 우리 한동법률대학원 힐스에서 또 후원을 해주셨고, 또 제가 속해 있는 우리 GA 학부에서도 도와주셨고요. 그 다음에 우리 카마이클 칼리지에서도 협찬을 해주셔서 진심으로 감사를 드립니다. 오늘 원래는 닉 란팅가 교수님께서 코멘트를 주시기로 하셨는데, 여러분 들으신 바와 같이 그 딸이 이번에 그 오케스트라 연주를 하기 때문에 할 수 없이 거기 가시게 되었고요. 같은 우리 카마이클 칼리지에서 헤드마스터로 섬기시는 우리 슐튼 교수님께서 논평을 맡아주시게 되었습니다. 비교적 짧은 시간에 부탁을 드렸기 때문에 코멘트를 직접 적으실 시간이 없으셨지만 좋은 그 논평을 해주셨는데요. 자연과학이든 인문과학이든 우리가 모두 함께 믿음에서 출발한다. 그것은 우리가 그 근본적인, 토대적인 믿음이라고 할 수 있다는 이야기를 다시 한번 요약해 주셨고, 그래서 그리스도인이든 비그리스도인이든 모두가 함께 그런 믿음에서 출발하되, 그러나 우리 그리스도인들은 비그리스도인들과 함께 동의할 수 있는 부분도 있지만 또 동의할 수 없는 부분들도 있다는 것을 우리가 함께 인식하고 있어야 되겠다. 그런 면에서 이 오늘 내용은 우리 기독학자들이 얼마든지 그 추구하는 학문에 대해서 디펜스할 수 있는, 변호할 수 있는 부분이라고 말씀을 하셨습니다. 동시에 아울러 우리 그 기독학자들이 이런 내용들을 잘 이해함과 함께 비기독학자들에 대해서 너무 다른 점만을 생각하지 말고 그 안에도 함께 하나님의 진리를 발견하고 나눌 수 있는 그런 가능성에 대해서 언제나 우리의 마음을 오픈해야 되고 그들의 의견에 귀를 기울여야 한다. 그리고 함께 이 학문적인 노력에 참여해야 된다는 것을 강조하였습니다. 그게 법이든 언어학이든 공학이든 간에 함께 서로 협력할 수 있는 부분은 얼마든지 협력을 해야 되고 또 우리 그리스도인으로서 갖고 있는 어떤 특별한 견해에 대해서는 또 그것도 함께 말할 수가 있어야 된다. 그것을 균형 있게 해야 된다는 하나의 좋은 메시지라고 말씀하셨습니다. Okay, thank you very much. I have just summarized what you have said in Korean. Now it's the time for Professor van Woudenberg to respond for the 3 comments, please. 네, 반 바우든베르그 교수님께서 세 분의 논평에 대해서 답변을 해주시겠습니다. Okay.
I'll try to be really brief, so as to have the audience also the opportunity to say various things. So Professor Kook-Won Lee says, well, Kuyper said every science in a certain degree starts from faith. And then he suggests, well, shouldn't we turn it around? Why shouldn't we say every faith in a certain degree starts from science? Or perhaps even every faith in a certain degree ends with science? I was puzzled by these suggestions for the following reason. Why think that if I have faith that my mother hadn't lied to me about who my father was, why should we say that faith of mine in a certain degree would start from science? Think of all the other examples of faith that Kuyper gives. Faith about that there's an external world, that we faith in the principles of logic, faith in the reliability of our senses. Well, why think that that type of faith should start from science? I take his point to be, it can start from science, because in order to do science, you have to assume all these foundational beliefs. You have to start out with faith. So that's why I was puzzled by the suggestion that every faith in a certain degree starts from science. It seems so. I was worried there. And for different reasons, I also worried by the suggestion that every faith in a certain degree ends with science. So I haven't tried to indicate what science is, and there's always a demarcation problem. How do you distinguish science from what's not science? But why think that every faith in a certain degree ends with science? So here's an element of faith, if Kuyper is correct, that I trust my senses, and we all trust our senses. Now I look in your direction and I see what kind of coat you have on and what sort of tie you're wearing, and I see what Professor Endlo and the other colleague and what you are wearing. I'm forming all sorts of beliefs, and these beliefs all involve faith in reliability of my senses. But where's the science? It doesn't result in any science. At least I should think that science has to do with the application of procedures. It has to do with control situations. Whereas, in the ordinary run of perception, well, we don't do those sorts of things. Well, sometimes we double check, is it really gray? No, it's really dark or something. But that's not science. Taking another look, that isn't yet science. So that's why I'm somewhat reluctant to accept the idea that every faith in a certain degree ends with science. So perhaps Professor Kuyper from Handu no doubt you have to say something in response, but this is my first response. The second point is the phrase foundational epistemologist. Right, we don't, in our circles we don't use that sort of, we say, well, foundationalism is just one series or one family of epistemological theories next to, for instance, coherentism or reliabilism or others, but it's foundationalism, and I take Kuyper to be a foundationalist of a certain sort. He's more in the same, well, anyway, so that's my response. Professor Kuyper. Now Professor Enlow makes interesting points about miracles. Now I don't think that I've said that Kuyper argued that in the natural sciences no conflict is possible. So he talks about the lower parts of the sciences and the more elevated parts, and he says the higher you reach, for instance, the nearer you get to the scientific study of human beings, for instance, well, the more likely it is that this disagreement is to occur. Now, when it comes to miracles, well, is a miracle, if you say, that is a miracle, is that purely an observational report? Or is it something that you have observed and interpreted in a certain way? So my question is this sort of, you know, when I look at my neighbor's jacket or coat and I see, well, it has this particular color, well, we wouldn't exactly call that interpretation. That's sort of direct perception. Now, when we say, here's an event, and I tell you, it's a miracle worked by God, well, then we go, in a way, we go over what we are perceiving. So you might think that that even on the purely observational level, those people who believe that an event, that a miracle has occurred, doesn't disagree with the person who doesn't believe or who disbelieves that a miracle has occurred. So, well, here's a description of the fact. The doctors tell us this. All doctors agree on the fact. And now I'll tell you, I strongly feel, given other things that I believe, that God worked a miracle. But that somehow surpasses what can be described on this lowest level, and it is supposed to be characteristic in Kuyper's view of, well, these lower parts of the natural sciences. And the second point I'd like to make in response to Professor Enlow is that Kuyper doesn't identify faith with saving faith. On the other hand, he also, so my response is, but saving faith might be included in this more capacious notion of faith, namely foundational beliefs of which we are, to a certain degree, certain. So it may, so the faith that he's talking about may involve or encompass forms of saving faith, and especially when he says that that a Christian consciousness, for a Christian consciousness, things simply appear differently from a person who is not reborn. Well, that suggests that for a reborn person, additional beliefs may be foundational. So my response to your point is, well, it's quite a broad category of faith, and in Kuyper's view, I'm pretty sure it includes saving faith. But when it comes to faith as it's operative in the natural sciences, faith in the external world, faith in the reliability of our, well, that's not saving faith, right? But it might, but faith might include, or actually it does include, as a category, also these things that we specifically believe as Christians. Well, then these extempore remarks by Professor Schulten. Well, I think that's very clever remarks. What Kuyper says is, or what Kuyper offers is, on the one hand, an apology for Christian scholarship, and at the same time an admonition vis-a-vis the Christian scholar not to shy away from what others who are professed non-believers are saying. I think in Kuyper's work the stress is most of the time on the first thing, But you're entirely correct. It seems to me that you can also read Kuyper as making this admonition, this urging not to shy away from what other people, because Christians and non-Christians, they live in the same world, in the world that God has created. And through common grace and through general revelation, you know, many true things, many true thoughts have been found out by, well, Plato, as Augustine says, and by numerous other. So sure, we should do that. So I thought it was actually quite clever dual painting of a dual picture of what Kuyper was actually doing when he was defending faith in science. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 예, 코멘트가 조금 시간이 많이 걸렸지만 이제 여러분들에게 질문할 시간을 드리겠고요. 이분이 그 말씀하신 내용 간단하게만 말씀드리면 우리 이 교수님의 그 코멘트에 대해서 신앙이 그 모든 학문 활동 속에 전제되어 있다는 것을 이 교수님께서 한번 이렇게 순서를 바꾸면 어떻겠느냐 이런 이제 제안을 하셨는데 그런 부분에서 자기가 조금 거기에 대해서는 좀 퍼즐되었다는 말씀을 하셨죠. 왜냐하면 모든 학문 활동에는 기본적으로 가정해야 되는, 전제해야 되는 그런 근본적인, 토대적인 신앙적인 요소가 있기 때문에 이걸 뒤바꿨을 때 과연 얼마나 설득력이 있겠느냐 하는 이야기를 하실 것 같고요. 그 다음에는 그 신앙이 그 학문 활동에서 끝날 때 있으면 어떻겠느냐 하는 것도 조금 더 논리적으로 따져보면 조금 그것이 쉽지 않다는 이야기를 하신 것 같습니다. 두 번째로 엔로 교수님의 특별히 그 기적에 대한 코멘트를 해주셨는데 그 기적도 우리가 순수하게 관찰로만 가능한 것이 아니라 어떤 현상에 대해서 분명히 우리가 그것을 기적으로 해석하는 요소가 있다는 것이죠. 한 현상에 대해서 이것이 하나님의 개입이다. 갑자기 병이 나았을 때 단순히 병 나았다고 말하는 사람도 있지만 우리는 그것은 하나님의 치유의 기적이라고 표현할 때가 있거든요. 그렇기 때문에 순수하게 이것을 관찰로만 말하기는 어렵고 해석적 요소가 들어간다 하는 이야기를 해주셨고요. 그 다음에 일반적인 믿음과 구원받는 믿음은 차이가 있다. 과학의 전제가 되는 일반적인 신앙적 요소와 또 구원받는 신앙적 요소는 조금 차이가 있다는 것을 또 이야기해 주셨지만 그러나 넓은 의미에서 아주 넓은 의미에서는 하나의 동일한 신앙이라고 믿음이라고 말할 수도 있겠다 하는 이야기를 해 주셨습니다. 마지막으로 우리 이제 슐튼 교수님의 논평에 대해서는 기독교적인 학문이든지 또 비기독교적인 학문이든지 간에 우리가 공통점을 충분히 인식하는 동시에 또 기독교적인 학문을 한다고 해서 우리가 부끄러워하거나 움츠릴 필요가 없이 우리가 함께 하나님이 지으신 세상에 같이 있고 하나님의 일반 은총 속에 일반 계시 속에 함께 학문 활동을 하기 때문에 우리의 아이덴티티에 대해서 우리가 얼마든지 당당하게 우리가 할 수 있는 이야기들을 할 수 있어야 되겠다 하는 이야기를 해 주셨습니다. Now, I try to summarize in Korean for the three comments. It's time for open discussions. So we have some microphone for you. 지금 이제 우리가 무슨 마이크가 있으니까요. 누구든지 질문해도 좋습니다. 우리 강사, 우리 교수님에게 말씀하셔도 좋고 또 논평하신 교수님에게 질문하셔도 좋고요. Any questions, any professors, any students can raise your hands, introduce yourself, and then you can ask some questions. Okay? Who wanna do that first? 질문하실 분 혹시 손 들어주시고 자기 소개 간단하게 해주시고 질문하시면 되겠습니다. Any professors or students? So you need some time to think.
While people are getting warmed up, I have a question.
Sure.
Professor, I have a question for you about Kuyper's skepticism. Not you, Kuyper. When Kuyper says, as you have him quote him on page 4 of our handout, Kuyper says, we actually owe all our convictions of the realism of the object exclusively to faith. Without faith, you can never go from your ego to the non-ego. There is no other bridge to be constructed from phenomena to noumena. That seems to me to represent an extremist view of the incapacity of our powers of scientific demonstration to establish the reality of the world, the basic reliability of our senses. And that seems to me to be a minority view, that we can't demonstrate those things. We can't demonstrate the existence of the world at all without faith. Many people, it seems to me, would say, no, we can demonstrate that. So I wonder if my view of Kuyper's sort of underlying philosophy is he's actually a skeptic. He has to be a skeptic before he can make claims like that.
I take it that,
마이크 좀 켜주시죠.
I think that Kuyper, he learned a lesson from. Well, I think it's working. I think it's working again.
You only get one microphone at a time.
So I take it Kuyper had his eye on a very important part of the history of philosophy, namely the parts starting with Descartes, Berkeley, and the idea that the only things that we can really be sure about, really be sure about, is how the world seems to us, how the world appears to us. So Descartes has this famous experiment, or this thought experiment with the evil demon who is trying to deceive us. He said, suppose there is an evil demon who likes to deceive us. He makes us think that, you know, we are together in a big lecture hall. We are discussing with one another. We have our clothes on. We have shoes on our feet, most of us. Suppose this demon wants to have us think those thoughts and believe these things. But in fact, we're lying in our bed and we are in a deep sleep. And somehow this evil demon makes us think these thoughts. Well, if that's the scenario, we can't, it's all false what we believe. Then we don't have clothes on, we don't have shoes on, we are not in an auditorium, we are not talking with each other about important subject matters. But then Descartes says, you know, the only thing you can really be sure of is what seems to be to you the case. Now, how can you ever conclude from, or go from how things seem to be to you the case, to how the world really is? Because you can't, I'm sorry, it's singing around. Because you can't, from premises about your own appearances, you can't make any conclusions as to what the world is really like, because you can't exclude the possibility that we're being deceived. Or present-day philosophers like to talk about brains in vats, right? The idea is, you know, you're being transported to a high-tech hospital, your skull is being opened, and your brains are being taken out of your skull and are placed in a container of liquids that nourishes your brain. Your brainstem is connected to a computer, and there's a super scientist who is like madness. He is working on the keyboard, and he is giving you all sorts of experiences. So he touches the keyboards in a certain way, and you have the experience of being thirsty in your mouth, or you have he touches the keys in other ways, and you have the experience of a magnificent landscape, or the experience of mountaineering, and you feel the sweat dripping down your back, and your muscles, they are getting sore because the path is really steep. But you know, you have no back along which the sweat can be dripping down. You don't have muscles. You're only a brains in a vat. Now, in that particular situation, whatever the brain in the vat believes, it's all false. And since we can never, I mean, the brain of the vet doesn't really have knowledge of the world, certainly doesn't have knowledge of his own physical experiences, because, you know, there's no body that available. Well, to make a very long story very short, since we cannot exclude that we are brains and fat, says Descartes, or since we cannot exclude that we are being misled by an evil demon, the only thing we can really be sure of is how things seem to us. How can we ever argue from how things seem to us to this is the way the world is? Well, you can only do that when you presuppose, have this fundamental faith that there are no evil demons deceiving us. This fundamental faith that we are not brains and fat. In a way, we can only do that when on the basis of the faith that there is this external world. And I take that to be Kuyper's point. And as a matter of fact, philosophically speaking, that seems to me a very good point. Because no radical skeptic about the external world has ever been convinced by any arguments starting out with premises about how the world appears to him, to the conclusion, hence there's an external world, by the way, the world that our sciences aim to study. And later on, I mean, I could go on, but this is, I take this to be Kuyper's thought here. It's really an act of faith that we believe there is this external world. We simply can't prove it.
오케이, 우리 두 분의 그 토론의 내용은 제가 이해하기로는 엔로 교수님이 그 카이퍼의 회의론에 관한 질문이었습니다. 그 현상계와 비현상계에 더 이상 우리가 브릿지가 없다 하는 그런 거에 대해서 어떻게 생각하는가에 대해서 질문했는데, 이제 그 바우든베르그 교수님의 답변은 여기 4페이지 중간에 나오는 그 내용인데요. 결국 카이퍼는 지식도 결국은 신앙과 분리할 수 없다. 기본적인 지식, 즉 우리가 지금 이 강당에 있고 이 외부 세계가 있다고 하는 그 사실을 우리가 전제하지 않고는 어떠한 학문적인